Good morning, everyone. We're so excited to be here with you today. This is a bit of a coming out for us, for Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative. We have been heavily involved in the community during the past year, but because of COVID, we couldn't introduce ourselves to you all fully. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for our partners who are joining us today, and thank you for the new faces that have decided to come enjoy and join us today for this work ahead. The Community Wealth Building Forum is designed to be a very interactive, very engaging, solutions-oriented experience. Later today during the workshops, please know your thoughts, your experiences, and your insights are not only welcomed, but encouraged as we all roll up our sleeves today to work on solutions for shared prosperity. Before I dive into the community wealth building strategies and the why and how of Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative's role in promoting them, let's take a look at this video about the organization.
Yeah, so, first of all, the fact that there is a racial wealth gap is sort of astonishing in 2021. It's not astonishing is the wrong word. It shouldn't be acceptable.
Believe it or not, we have grown up in a very segregated South. And even though we say it's not, since the 60s, it has been. And so there hasn't been as much opportunity as there should be.
I think the other thing is in America, there's still a lot of, racial challenges around getting funding. Getting a loan, right? Figuring out who to talk to, and do you have a banking relationship, and do you have $1 million in a savings before I loan you $100,000? That's just very real. The reality is you need to be able to understand this black wealth gap is it's a detriment to our country. And so entrepreneurship, I think, is the easiest way to affect that.
The Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative is a nonprofit intermediary organization focused on closing the racial wealth gap. We do so by leveraging national and international best practices, bold ideas, thought leadership, and strategic capital to increase shared prosperity in Atlanta. Our strategies are grounded in community wealth building strategies.
So for us, it's around getting dollars into the hands who need it, but it's also around challenging the current systems that have created barriers for entry.
Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative, it's really has been there for us to build institutions that will provide generational wealth for our community. The type of wealth that we haven't seen en masse in so long.
And we're also looking at grants. How do we use this flexible capital around philanthropy and individual giving to really help accelerate ways that we can really do economic inclusion differently?
I believe AWBI's role is connector. Some of our largest funders have come from our relationships with the community practice, so we're extremely grateful.
What I see that AWBI appears to be doing is building a entrepreneurial ecosystem that will help accelerate the growth of jobs.
It's the inclusivity of how it's always about collaboration and partnering and including new partners who come into the fold. That's to me what makes AWBI different.
Whether it's Gains to the Growers, whether it's the Connect, and whether it's partnerships like the Village Micro Fund, we are looking at new and different ways to activate capital that will reduce all barriers to entry for individuals and families who are trying to grow and help close this racial wealth gap.
Black entrepreneurs of color, it's not standard still, and it needs to be standard. And I believe organizations like Prosper and AWBI are working to try to make it standard and balance the playing field so that everyone in America has an opportunity to truly have access to the American dream.
As noted in the video, Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative is a community-built, data-centered organization focused on closing the racial wealth gap and using community wealth building strategies. Ideas, capital, and people are at the core of our work to create an Atlanta where shared prosperity is a reality for all. Atlanta has a thriving, bustling economy. We are home to 30 Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies, which had $438 billion in aggregated revenues in 2019. We have a strong network of post-secondary education institutions, and our culture, energy, and dedication to this great city is unmatched. However, Atlanta is also currently number 2 in income inequality, just behind San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we are near the bottom of the list for economic mobility. A child born into poverty in Atlanta has just a 4% chance of escaping it in his or her lifetime. The median Black household income in Atlanta is $28,000 compared to roughly $84,000 for white households. This compares to the median national Black household income at roughly $36,000 compared to roughly $60,000 nationally for white households. Said another way, while the median white household income in Atlanta is 41% higher than the national median, the median Black household income is 21% lower than the national median, creating a significantly larger income gap in Atlanta compared to the national median. We also know the impact of COVID is widening the gap. According to the 2020 US Census Household Pulse Survey, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Black residents in the Atlanta region have been more likely than white residents to receive assistance from a food bank, decide to or be forced to delay medical care, not have confidence in their ability to make their next mortgage or rent payment, be laid off, terminated, or furloughed, have their wages or hourly pay reduced, have their work hours reduced, apply for unemployment insurance, or cancel plans for post-secondary education. Our great city is more than equipped to fix these disparities, as long as we are intentional and work together. We will need grassroots and grassroots organizations, corporations, anchor institutions, and government dedicated at the same time to addressing these great disparities affecting the lives of our Black community, and ultimately the growth and success of our economy overall, to close the racial wealth gap and create shared prosperity. Data shows a common thread demonstrating the greatest disparities across the board, be it health, income, wealth, education, housing, or the criminal justice system, all exist between and have the greatest impact on African Americans. To illustrate what this means, I'd like to share a metaphor originated by Bayard Love and Dina Hayes Green of the Racial Equity Institute in their report, The Groundwater Approach, Building Practical Understanding of Structural Racism, which assesses the state of the fish, the lake, and the groundwater. If you have a lake in front of your house and one fish is floating belly up dead, it makes sense to analyze the fish. What is wrong with it? Imagine the fish is one student failing in the education system. We'd ask, did it study hard enough? Is it getting the support it needs at home? But if you come out to that same lake and half the fish are floating belly up dead, what should you do? This time you got to analyze the lake. Imagine the lake is the education system, and half the students are failing. This time we'd ask, might the system itself be causing such consistent, unacceptable outcomes for students? If so, how? Now, picture 5 lakes around your house, and in each and every lake, half the fish are floating belly up dead. What is it time to do? It's time to analyze the groundwater. How did the water in all these lakes end up with the same contamination? On the surface, the lakes don't appear to be connected, but it's possible, even likely, that they are. This time, we can imagine half the kids in any given region are failing in the education system, half the kids suffer from ill health, half are performing poorly in the criminal justice system, half are struggling in and out of the child welfare system. And it's often the same kids in each system. If each system is creating similar inequities, similar disparities, we must assess how our systems are connected, how we use our positions in one system to impact a structural racial arrangement that is deeper than any one system. We cannot simply fix fish and clean up one lake at a time. All we do is put fixed fish back into toxic water or filter a lake that is quickly recontaminated by the toxic groundwater. This example and the inequity shared today indicate we live in a racially structural society, and that is what causes racial inequity. Racial inequity looks the same across systems, regardless of people's culture or behavior, and regardless of socioeconomic differences. These inequities affect African Americans disproportionately. Accordingly, in 2019, shortly after I joined as an inaugural executive director, we made a decision to exclusively focus our initial efforts on the Black community. The organization's commitment began, as Tanae indicated, in 2017. The then dormant organization was adopted from the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta by the Candida Fund and the Annie E. Casey Foundation to focus on racial wealth inequity. As a data-centered organization, the development of AWBI began with 18 months of convenings led by our board of directors in partnership with Prosperity Now, the Candida Fund, and the Annie E. Casey Foundation to determine what was already being done to address the disparities and what community leaders and stakeholders needed to dynamically move the needle to close the racial wealth gap. These community members, which would become our community of practice, now roughly 45 nonprofit, government, quasi-government, and philanthropic partners, indicated they wanted a coordinating body that could raise awareness about the good work already being done, ensure work was not done in silos, and coordinate resources, access, and connectivity throughout the ecosystem. This group remains critical to ensure the national and international bold ideas we or others bring to the market, as well as those rooted in the local community, are grounded in the needs of the community for maximum and intended impact. You too are critical. As we gather here today, safely and remotely, it is critical that we collectively understand that shared prosperity begins by building wealth in a way that does not just extract from community for individual gain, but instead has a responsibility to promote engagement and investment for the stabilization, growth, and economic security of the community as a whole. We believe community wealth building strategies provide the greatest pathway to create shared prosperity. Before diving deeper into community wealth building and beginning our work together later this afternoon, let's define what we mean by wealth. Wealth, from an economics perspective, is one's net worth, the value of your assets minus the value of your debts, what you owe versus what you own. It is not defined by income or earnings. It provides economic security to take risks and shields against loss. It also allows one to withstand financial hardship due to a personal or family emergency. Moreover, financial assets are essential to individual well-being and the viability of families and communities. The acquisition of wealth also has a profound impact across generations. It affords opportunity to purchase appreciating assets, which in turn generates wealth that can be accumulated and then passed down to children, thus begetting more wealth and opportunity. Families and community without wealth, particularly intergenerational wealth and accumulated assets, are at a crucial disadvantage in their everyday life and in their ability to participate in our democracy. Wealth, however, is more than money and financial assets. Critical to the accumulation and sustainability of wealth is power and agency, a sense of control over one's life and destiny, the ability to make choices and craft a future for yourself, your family, and your community. Wealth is the social capital of connection, the individual capital of skills, the intellectual capital of new ways of operating, and the natural capital of healthy ecosystems, all of which can be accomplished with investment in a community-centered approach. Wealth provides options for essential childcare, to more freely navigate systems to obtain both private education or options to live in better public school districts, safe and secure housing with better amenities, the ability to finance a business, access quality health care, and life-saving medical procedures. It also affords the ability to purchase better legal counsel to protect one's interests in a civil matter or within an expensive criminal justice system. As stated earlier, the racial wealth gap in Atlanta and throughout our country is significant. Even during times of economic growth, inequity grows, with all gains going to the elite or upper middle class. We saw history repeat itself just last year during the pandemic when the stock market recovered quickly while people lost jobs and housing in record numbers, and the need at local food banks and pantries was at an all-time high. In the midst of these striking inequities, Narratives persist attributing the gap to center on the notion that, for example, Black people are not as eager to acquire education, which then inhibits their ability to acquire wealth. The net worth of African Americans with a college degree is 2/3 of the net worth of white heads of household with a high school diploma. While education is valuable, particularly with a cradle to career framework, education alone is not an antidote, particularly when there is not family wealth to help fund that education or reduce student loan debt and other considerable education related expenses such as books, food, and housing. Other narratives attribute the gap to behavior choices of how and where Black people spend their money. These narratives, however, do not address the root causes in the groundwater that result in continued disparity. Attributing these inequities to individual personal deficits and behavior ignores the advantages of wealth and the pervasive historical and structural policies that have contributed to the intrinsic privileges that favor those with existing wealth rather than systems to establish new wealth. Ignoring the history and policy is a choice that also prevents action to assess structural solutions. We know you wouldn't be here today if you were not ready for action, and we appreciate your commitment. As James Baldwin stated, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. With that in mind, the historical conditions of building wealth in this country are largely grounded by the labor and land holdings of Black and Brown people. Slavery was the most profound economic engine for the foundation and continued progress of our economy. Institutions, endowments, and individuals benefit to this day from the contributions of slave labor and predatory practices that have impacted the descendants of enslaved people. In addition to the limitations of slavery, attempts of formerly enslaved and free Black Americans to garner wealth were largely followed by violence, seizure, and the appropriation of land and resources from the end of the 19th century through the early 20th century. The Homestead Act, for example, was established to provide 160 acres of public land, which forced Indigenous Americans from land they held for centuries to provide an economic mobility engine for largely white Americans. Freed slaves technically qualified, but the act specifically excluded two occupations: agricultural workers and domestic servants, largely preventing free Black Americans from using this tool of social welfare to establish economic security and wealth. 45 million people still benefit from this program today. This was followed by the failure to provide the 40 acres promised to formerly enslaved people after the end of the Civil War. This period was closely followed by white-led massacres beginning during Reconstruction that impacted vast amounts of wealth accumulated during this period, particularly by Black property owners and especially in communities of Black prosperity. This includes better-known events such as in the Greenwood District of Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921 and Rosewood, Florida in 1923, but also in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898 and Lane, Arkansas in 1919, which started as a result of sharecroppers attempting to organize a union. This intimidation and terror has had a lasting impact for generations, causing some Black people to not dare assert their equality or autonomy. There is an expectation of disenfranchisement at best and violence at worst. Less obvious than sheer violence are policies that constructed highways intentionally through Black neighborhoods like the Haytide District in Durham, or the intentional construction of I-20 in Atlanta that still leaves the city largely segregated. Similar to the Homestead Act, other policies during the Jim Crow era after World War II, such as the GI Bill or federal subsidy programs to assist people to become homeowners, which intended to create greater social and economic mobility for Americans, also ultimately excluded Black Americans. Due to the decentralized administration of these policies, where local administrators made the decisions regarding which veterans received benefits, these benefits were vastly not available to Black veterans and overutilized by white veterans. These policies and the lack of access to these programs widened the wealth gap and continued with practices such as redlining, which persists informally today. You will hear more about these injustices and required proposed restorative policies during the Reparations in the New Economy workshop this afternoon. As reported by Citi in 2020, the racial wealth gap doesn't just hinder the growth and well-being of Black people. The racial divide sets our entire economy back. Not addressing the racial wealth gap has cost the US economy $16 trillion over the last 20 years. The good news is, as reported by Citi in 2020, taking action to close the racial wealth gap could increase the US GDP by 4.8 trillion by 2025. This would mean increases in federal tax revenue, corporate profits, and much more. 4.8 trillion is a hard number to digest. So for context, the 2021 federal budget is 4.829 trillion, roughly the same amount for 1 year of the federal budget. Closing the wealth gap will benefit everyone. Dr. Rondarity has noted it would take $10 trillion to bring Black held assets to the level of assets held by white Americans. So effective action will require a system of support and changes to existing systems to adequately address the wealth disparities that exist, including shifting tax policies, advocacy, and efforts to build civic, cultural, and political agency, focusing on stable, long-term investments to maximize impact on structures and systems of power. That said, we can lead transformative work and serve as a guide to tackle systemic barriers and the structural issues within our groundwater to promote equity and the most marginalized residents. As history has repeated, addressing the problem for the marginalized provides positive, measurable impact for the general populace as well. Accordingly, Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative employs and promotes 7 main strategies of community wealth building as groundwater solutions, modeling frameworks implemented nationally and internationally, such as those in Preston, United Kingdom. The panelists today will walk us through some of those strategic solutions. Often emphasize these strategies are not new or radical. There was a time when we were a community-centered economy, when we held a responsibility individually and as a society to the greater good of others and community well-being before neoliberalism and free market capitalism took hold as an intentional, well-funded, and carefully implemented individualistic strategy. Our adopted community wealth building strategies focus on anchor procurement that directs resources of local institutions to improve and benefit their local neighborhoods and communities. You'll hear more later today during our afternoon session about how we have begun to implement this strategy with an anchor institution that is also the largest employer in Atlanta. They also include financing policies and strategic investments designed to build healthy local economies through equitable financial investments. For example, in response to the impact of COVID last year, AWBI launched a COVID-19 Small Business Relief Fund. We provided close to $800,000 in grants and loans to Black-owned small businesses. We also created a community loan fund with flexible terms, very flexible underwriting criteria, and a community-centered review process. We were able to help companies like Brown Toy Box that noted we were the only funder or capital provider that would grant or loan them money early in the pandemic. I'm elated to share Brown Toy Box's African American themed steam boxes will now be in Targets across the nation. The company's founder, Terry Nichelle Bradley, noted they would not have been able to get to the next stage of growth without AWBI's support during a critical time. Community wealth building strategies also include equitable land and real estate development strategies, including land trusts, urban gardens, and land banks to facilitate community ownership of land for affordable housing, commercial space, or to acquire blighted properties for future productive community use. You'll hear more about our plans to support retention and anti-displacement during the Advancing Enterprise Prosperity 1,000 Black Businesses in 1,000 Days launch this afternoon. Additionally, enterprise development and retention strategies ranging from efforts to promote entrepreneurship and small business development to worker-owned businesses and cooperatives are part of the strategy. AWBI supported 65 small businesses and 25 nonprofit small business support organizations last year alone to strengthen our community-based small business ecosystem. We are excited to officially launch our seminal work to further this effort later today. Community wealth building strategies also support workforce development strategies that create pipelines for employment, linking employers, jobs, and training to residents and communities that have faced systemic barriers to sustainable employment opportunities. We believe these efforts must be holistic and begin at the neighborhood level. We take into consideration, what does it mean to be the first employee? What does it mean to be an employee with a company that will never have more than 10 employees? Root causes require root solutions, and we must all make the effort to focus our efforts there. Other strategies include ecological resilience, strategies to pair workforce and economic development with ecological goals, and sustainability efforts. As we focus these strategies exclusively on the Black community, we believe it is also important to focus the efforts to address environmental injustices, which often impact communities of color more severely. Finally, AWBI has added wellness as a strategy. As we continue to do this work last year, exclusively focused on the Black community, it became apparent that until we address how structural racism and the disparities that have followed, both historically and present day, have had on the physical and mental health of Black people cannot truly be free. We observe, regardless of a person's socioeconomic status, the burdens of structural racism they bear each day, often limiting Black people's ability to innovate and explore the fullness of their abilities and excellence, without holding the burden that they will be limited somehow simply because they are Black, or worse, setting those limitations on themselves based on the limited opportunities they have seen Black people possess. We approach racial healing as a collective responsibility and commitment rather than an internal healing that must occur only within people of color. AWI seeks out restorative solutions that identify the root issues to counteract centuries of discrimination, violence, and predatory practices. We also support healing opportunities for the tireless servant leaders dedicated to this work. AWI's impact is made possible by community wealth building strategies. Using these community wealth building strategies, AWBI has stayed grounded and proximate to community, positioning AWBI for rapid COVID response and convening work amid COVID and the recent awakening. Employing these strategies in the last year, AWBI has awarded close to $1.2 million in grants, loans, technical assistance, and programmatic support. As I stated earlier, we've supported 65 Black-owned small businesses, awarded 25 nonprofit business support organizations just in the last year, not including the grants that we provided in 2018 and 2019. We preserved 300 jobs at Black-owned businesses and helped direct $6.8 million in additional private funding to Georgia's Black-owned businesses and nonprofit business support organizations. We also led a coordinated effort and coalition of 38 institutions across the city of Atlanta to give voice and specific calls to action to support the local Black community through the Businesses Black Awareness Campaign, which began in response to the uprisings of last spring and the awakening that continued. The campaign highlights 5 calls to action to increase economic equity in Atlanta. One, a Buy Black campaign, a repair, rebuild, and resilience fund, shared service model to eliminate digital and professional services gaps, equitable growth strategy, and access to new market opportunities and networks. AWBI continues to partner to advance campaign strategies, promoting and encouraging the broad adoption of the 5 calls of action, which is a part of our 1,000 Black businesses launch today. The Black Businesses Black effort will continue as an innovation arm of the 1,000 Black Businesses campaign, which is based on recommendations from our 2017 Advancing Collective Prosperity report commissioned with Prosperity Now. You will hear more about how AWBI, our community practice partners and friends from around the country are employing community wealth building strategies in our workshops and presentations later today, so stay tuned. Collectively, we have an incredible opportunity today and beyond to lift up the specific solutions that will be shared this afternoon. Some of us with continued dedications, others through bold first steps as we close today. The important part is you are here. We are together, and we are gathered here at this forum to roll up our sleeves, lift our voices, and get to work to close the gap and create a brighter future for businesses and families. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your partnership. I'm excited about the day ahead.